Do we have a way to check the overflow besides wrapping it in a checked? Is even wrapping it in a check not work either?
Right, wrapping in a check won't work because checked contexts only apply to the local method body, not any nested calls. Also, we wouldn't be able to support this as checked without falling back to a scalar for loop, which defeats the purpose of using vector of t most of the time anyways. There's no hardware accelerated overflow detection, really, that is.
Got it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alright, so unless there's any more questions, I think this is it. So next one, I think this is also from Tanner.
Yes. So in this case, it's worth calling out that Jan doesn't believe that this is really necessary over the users just casting the result of single to int 32 bits to uint themselves. And I ultimately decided we should just take it to API review because I think it's worthwhile. This is functionally similar, it just deals with the unsigned type rather than the signed type. Most of our own internal usages are actually calling single to int 32 bits today and casting to uint, because when you're doing bit manipulation on the underlying value, particularly because extracting the exponent or other parts of the floating point format, you don't want to preserve the sign bit when doing the shift operations or other arithmetic related things, and so you actually want it to be unsigned.
So we already have, I think, them for the signed version, right?
Right.
Can you represent Jan's viewpoint on why he thinks it's not worth it? Because you can just cast, is that the idea?
Yeah, because the the actual code you would use otherwise is just calling the existing method and putting a paren uint close paren in front of it.
And you're asserting because it's so popular, or sorry, it's so frequently used that it's annoying to do that?
Right, and it's potentially a correctness concern for other users. So I think it's trivial to expose the helper method that just returns uint and takes uint. It increases the surface area minimally while making it simpler and easier to maintain the code in question that you are writing.
If the concern is a correctness issue.
Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, if the concern is a correctness issue, doesn't already having the existing method, I mean, people are just as likely to call it, no? If they would get it wrong, can't they still just get it wrong?
Right. In which case, we might have an analyzer suggesting they use the unsigned version.
Or had a cast.
Right.
I mean,
This implementation would simply just call singleton 32 bits and then cast it.
Right. So it's effectively a trivial helper method oriented around the more correct usage of this type. And if we were doing this today, I'd probably recommend we do all of them as unsigned, but I'm guessing it wasn't done that way in V1 because unsigned types are not CLS compliant.
so you're only proposing single. What about double?
Yeah, it should also be there for double and half. I think this was opened before we had discussed those. Let me just type those in real quick.
I mean, I fundamentally don't have a problem with those APIs because we very often have methods that are kind of logically overloaded over the argument types with type-based suffixes or infixes. I mean, there certainly is some bloat. If the only thing it does is a cast, it might seem a little bit redundant, but I mean, I can go either way. Like, I'd be happy with both accepting it and rejecting it. So I'm just curious what other people are thinking on the call.
As someone who's been bit by trying to shift signed links before when I wanted to shift unsigned, let's do it.
But like to that point, is this actually going to fix that for you? Because both options are going to be there. Okay.
No, I mean it's a small thing. I could go either way, but I'm leaning towards doing it because I do think that it's the one you want to call more. And anytime I'd call this at this point if I was going to do bit shifting, which granted not everyone's going to do, I tend to stick with unsigned numeric.
Right, and that was kind of my thinking. Is I don't have a strong preference for adding this, but it comes up frequently enough that I think it was at least worth bringing to API review to determine what the general consensus was on whether it should or should not be added.
Do you have a count for how many times we just cast? Like is it like a 75% of the time you should always use unsigned?
If you go to the last post in the issue, I linked to the places we're doing it in source.net.
But what about when we use signed? Do you know? The reason I asked the question is like, is it more correct? Like you said, if we would have done this from the beginning, should we have just used unsigned from the beginning?
Right. The majority case is we end up casting to unsigned whenever we are doing bit shift operations. If we're comparing against a constant value, we typically keep it as signed, except for when we have to compare against a negative hexadecimal representation, in which case we either have cast to unsigned or on the constant value we have unchecked cast to int 0x8 rest of value. So let me post it in chat here. So for example, we either have this or we have cases like in effectively all of our usages. Right, because you can't represent a hexadecimal constant starting with 8 as a signed integer type in C#. You have to use either the 2's complement positive representation or use unchecked. For negative values, yes. If you're compiling with a check context. No, by default it's unchecked. Right.
If I was to lean one way, I'd lean to add it. Like it seems useful enough, and it's 6 methods, right?
Right.
And
yeah, they're at the top now. They're on your screen.
And yeah, like it might not help somebody who has gotten bitten by it, but if you're looking at it and you see both signed and unsigned, and you really have to think about it, or you had to do the unchecked cast anyway, like, well, why don't I just call the unsigned version? It seems like a little bit more code cleanliness to me. Casting feels hacky. So that's where I would lean right now, is to add them. We'll see what Jan thinks. If he feels strongly enough to push back.
Yeah. If he feels really, really strongly, then like I said, I don't have myself a strong preference towards not adding it or towards adding it, but I felt that it was worth at least taking. So So this is another one of a fairly common bit hack that you would commonly end up trying to implement yourself via the, for example, Stanford website that lists common bit hacks. It's just rounding an integral value up to the nearest power of 2. If it's already a power of 2, it doesn't change. This is frequently used for memory when dealing with memory, for example, when you want to ensure that you're going up to the next power of 2, or that, for example, an alignment should be a power of 2. Notably, those should be returning uint and ulong, not int and int.
I'm just curious, what intrinsics would you use to optimize this?
You can use pop count for one example. Also, an optimized log2.
Which point you still need to use POW though, right?
No. Powers of 2 for integrals are just left shifts.
Oh, sure, right, okay.
So here is, for example, linked in chat, the one example of the recommended optimization and a discussion on how many code instructions it compiles down to, and potential other optimizations if you have, for example, an optimized log of 2 implementation. So the naive approach is just a series of shifts, but the optimized approach is effectively a leading 0 count, a subtraction, and then a left shift. That's where we put the other bit operation like value or like methods. So, for example, we put log of 2 for integer on here as well, rather than on math.
Didn't we also just approve a bit operations that is power of 2 or something like that?
Right. So we've been putting the math seems to be relegated mostly to common math operations and floating point, whereas bit operations has been centering itself around specifically integral values, where you have bitwise bitwise optimizations to make them extremely fast, or often even one instruction.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think I think the type is also brand new, right? It's like in 3.0, I think we added it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense. I mean, it is a more advanced API. Any objections to this API?
I don't have an objection. I just have a question about more. Like, would it be helpful to have other powers as well, like power of 8 or power of 64?
I'm not convinced that there would be. In particular, is power of 2 is a common operation. We use it in the BCL ourselves, and it's also used by basically every memory allocator in existence. Whereas if you're looking for other powers, those generally don't have a quick and short instruction sequence you can execute to determine. And I don't know how frequently they would be used.
Yeah, sorry, I said power. I kind of meant multiple. Like to round up to the next multiple of 8 or multiple of 64. Is that just something completely different?
I think that's a different API.
Okay.
And I think I think it would be interesting to find out what the use case would be for that and how frequently it might be used. I know, for example, one operation that is fairly frequent in the similar vein is divide, but rounding up rather than down, because the typical pattern for division is to round down with integrals, but you frequently want to round up instead.
So the reason I asked, the reason I bring it up.
Go ahead, Eric.
The reason I bring it up is the use case you illustrated for this one is like when you want to have alignment in memory, and that's actually one of the we use it in Apache Arrow. We use a similar operation here in Apache Arrow to try to get things, to multiples of 64.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's like 2 lines of code, right? It's kind of like use the bit hack in the code, so it's probably just extra.
Yeah, maybe you and I could sync up after, and we could discuss more what the use case would be and whether or not there's a general algorithm we could expose here for round up to the nearest multiple of an arbitrary value.
Well, it wouldn't be arbitrary; it'd be a power of 2, but like 8 or 64.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that sounds good though. Let's sync offline.
So I was going to say, I don't have a problem with exposing this. That said, most of the bit operations I'm aware we exposed had a plethora of our own internal callers. I know of one place where we do this internally. Are there more?
A string pool. Oh, he just listed high performance. I know of concurrent queue, and I thought there was another place where we were also rounding up.
Yeah, concurrent queue is the one but it's also not a.
Sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The one I know of is concurrent. It's but it's a functional thing. It's not on a high performance path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like ml.net is doing it in at least one place. Just looking for the term round up. System term info is using a round up to even method.
One detailed question on the actual name: do we do of 2 the number or of TWO the word? Because I look like we have of 2 is power of TWO in big integer. Similar when we do 1, like is 1, we spell it out.
So big integer is actually the outlier here. And we had this we had the same discussion when we did log2. Math and others have typically standardized on using the numeric value 2. And so if you look at bit operations, the rest of the APIs dealing with powers of 2 are using the numeric value 2.
Yeah, the only thing that sucks with the numeric one is it can only be in the middle or the end, right? So, but most of the time that happens to work because you have a verb in front of it.
Yeah, and 0 is spelled out as 0, not the numeric 0.
Yeah.
Is this just special of 2? Like, we have other things that have 1 spelled out 1.
I think it's special for 2 and 10 in particular, because that's what the C runtime has. That's what the C runtime did, and therefore that's what we did in math, and therefore that's what I've proposed for all future math and numerics related editions.
Okay.
Because that's also typically what you see when you're doing when you're writing mathematical expressions. You'd have log sub-expression 2, not log sub-expression TWO.
So maybe I missed it, but did we propose any changes to the API so far? Or did we just discuss it?
I haven't heard any changes yet. These are only unsigned?
Yeah. If we could do signed as well, but signed would, for all negative values, they'd become 1, which seems like it's undesirable in most cases.
Yeah, agreed.
And of course, we could check the input value, but most of bit operations is oriented around performance code. Most of numerics in general is actually, and so that seems like it's counterintuitive to how most of the other APIs are being used.
Yeah, all the other stuff on bit operations unsigned. So yeah, agreed. I think I'm good. I have no more questions.
Anybody else? Or is that it? Alright, I'll take it as this is good. And let me go through the dance again. Here are my notes. Also here.
Let's see if we can maintain this throughput rate of issue review for the rest of the meeting.
See, it's one of those examples where no matter what I do, I don't do the right thing. Like last time I tagged 10 people and then we got to 2 issues and then I felt bad for everybody I tagged. Now I only tagged a few people and we may need more people, so you never know. Alright, so I guess this is also 10, alright?
Yep. So this is just saying when we went and approved the API additions to int pointer and uint pointer for the inint and inuint primitives, it looks like there's some parse and try format overloads, specifically dealing with spans that we did not expose. So it's proposing that we expose them so that way users dealing with native integers can also parse and format values in an allocation-free way.
and this is where we prefer, instead of having overloads for each one, we prefer the default values. I can never I can never figure out when we like to use them and when we don't.
I think the pattern so far has been when it's an API that's been around since like .NET 1.0 or 2.0, we don't use default values, and new overloads don't use it as well. But when it came to introducing the read-only span overloads, because they were new overloads, we were able to use defaultable values instead of defining 4 variants.
Why doesn't try-parse have default values?
Because out is the last, and you can't default an out. And shouldn't, even if you could.
Is that where we should have overloads then?
I don't think we have the same overloads for try-parse on int32, for example, today.
Yeah, we do.
Do we? Then, yeah, we should have them here as well. No, we just have the 2 that are proposed here, it looks like. The one that takes all 4 and the one that takes 2.
Oh, I missed the try-parse. Yeah. The ordering messed me up there. I thought the simple one came first. Yep, you're right.
Yeah. Eric was asking if there was a reasoning for the overload for using defaultable parameters versus not, and if we are matching the overloads, and I believe we are.
Okay. Yeah, looking at it again, this is it was just the order of try-parse that had me messed up.
Yeah.
I assume we're skipping the string ones because we feel that the people who want to use inint and newint can understand that string and read-only span of char are the same thing?
We're skipping them because they're already exposed.
That's a good reason.
When back before 5.0 shipped, we reviewed a bunch of API additions to these types, and for whatever reason, I forgot the read-only span overloads.
Okay.
All right, then. Any more questions? I take that as a no. So then,
it's worth calling out. Someone on YouTube asked if they should return inint and inuint instead, and I responded that there's an identity conversion between inint and int pointer, and so taking and returning uint pointer and int pointer rather than the primitive keyword just matches what we've done for all the other exposed APIs, and there'll be no usability issue here.
So isn't there a
so
something like you have to cast it if it comes from int pitter, but you don't if it comes from new, or methods show up if they're typed differently or something?
Right. So you can do addition operations if it's inint, and other operations that were available in IL but not exposed on the type. So operators basically. But okay. Unless you're doing var x equals int pointer.parse, then it won't be an issue.
So does it mean if I do int.parse, do I get back int PTR or do I get back int?
I believe you get back int PTR, but I'd have to check.
Look, that's unfortunate.
But if you statically type it instead of using var, which is, I am aware it's static, but let's call it dynamically statically typed. If you write the word inint, then everything works fine. And so if you call try parse and say out var result, it's int pitter, and if you say out inint result, then you have a number.
Yeah, I get that. It just seems odd that, you know, the type that you use to invoke the static method on is basically not relevant, right? That's seems a bit unfortunate in that design, but or surprising, I should say.
It's mostly done for back compat, as far as I know.
You don't understand the back compat, because if I invoke it via inptr, I should get back inptr, but if I say, you know, nin.parse, it seems reasonable to give me back nin, right? But anyway, it's fine. It's shipped. It is what it is.
No, so if you do init.parse, the language treats it as returning inint.
Okay, so then sanity prevails. Okay, that's good.
Yep.
All right, so then another one from Tenor.
That's the one we just reviewed.
Okay, then I didn't close it, I guess. Or I approved some other API. Oh, no, I just opened it twice. Okay. Whew. This is Miriam, I believe. Is Miriam on the call?
Yes.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Hi. For this one, it's just basically two extensions methods on options builder, and the idea is that today, when we have the capability we already have today is that when we start an application, we don't we can do validation on options, but it doesn't happen at application startup. And in order to allow that to happen, we would need these two APIs, basically validate eagerly and validate annotation eagerly. The kind of, I tried to summarize everything I had, like comment-wise and like conversation-wise, anything that happened throughout the issue in the description. So if you have any questions.
So when you say startup, but like, I mean, what does it not? So logically when I call validate data annotations, right? Doesn't that validate everything? Like, what does it not validate?
I believe what happens is you would use validate annotations to validate data annotations today, but you'd have to wait until a request using that gets triggered, so then it will lazily validate. So you wouldn't get validation errors until you make a request that involves that option, basically. So for example, if I have a connection string somewhere coming up through some options, if I don't exercise a request that happens to use that connection string, not until that time, we will not get any validation errors. but this will make sure that when you do the startup, you get that. You fail if you have validation issues with your options.
Right. So if you had like a service that depended on those options, it would like throw when you tried to resolve it, as opposed to earlier when you call validate option.
I see. So eagerly means in this context it's basically validated at the time I call the method, or
What happens currently, you're asking?
yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like, what is the difference between eagerly and non-eagerly? Like, because I mean because it's clearly you're invoking code at the point you call the method. So clearly validated annotations non-eagerly doesn't do something that eagerly does, and I still don't understand what that is.
Basically, the idea is that, as Steve mentioned, the way current validations, data annotation, validation of options happen today is that you will not get your options validated until they are requested to be resolved, I believe through DI. And once they get resolved, that's when they are kind of getting a validation code also gets run on them. And rather than doing that later, after the application started, this capability, like using these two new APIs, would allow us to have some code run immediately during the startup of the application that goes through all options and validates all of them.
Useful.
It will. Did you say it won't or will?
It will
fail.
Yeah. So so
will.
if you call eagerly, I suppose that I don't know when you actually I don't know what the entry point to the actual run is, but I guess that's when it will fail, right?
Yeah. So it's like in a little bit of implementation detail would be that there would be a hosted service that would get added, and as part of the startup, it will run and validate all of the options, and then kind of give an aggregate exception out with all of the failures. Like throughout the conversations, like in the comment section earlier, one recommendation was to use a iStartup filter, which is kind of like I believe it's like it adds a pipeline while you're doing startup in order to do the validation, but then the feedback for that was that we don't want it to be host specific, and I believe they said they don't want it to be. They wanted to actually be working for generic hosts as well, and like a more generic option was to use hosted service, but that's implementation detail. For either approach, we can still use these two new APIs. And the effect is the same. That there would be a failure on application startup.
Yeah, I mean, the feature makes sense. My only question is eagerly the right term? Because it seems like we're not using that term anywhere today. So is there any other pattern in ASP.NET that basically clarifies behavior that happens on startup versus lazily?
I see.
But I couldn't find anything that like on startup or on initialize or anything like that.
I'm not. How do I say? I also didn't find anywhere else that there like there's a pattern of name like eagerly, but could be anything.
I mean, the feature makes sense to me. I think the way you expose it feels very idiomatic for the API, so looks good to me. Does anybody else have any questions or concerns?
I guess like one of my concerns comes to like implementation. Like as far as I understand, and not like an expert on iValidate options, I'm like perusing through the code right now, but it seems like iValidate options is an interface that services implement. So what about those? So like until you've built the service provider, is it too early to run those? But it could just be my lack of understanding there. I also see that there's a to-do about named option support, so I don't know.
That's I think like the prototype that's still already there doesn't support named options, but I don't think the API would need to change for it to kind of support. So like the to-do I have is kind of like maybe in a separate later iteration to figure out how to support that. And the limitation that I put over there is that we have 3 different types of options. I options, which is, as I put down there in a summary, it reads configuration data only after the app starts. So, and then overall, basically the scope of this feature is only for startups. So iOptions snapshots and iOptions monitor, the other 2 might change values after the application starts, so we don't really care about the changes there. And the only thing that needs to, as I said in the description, is to be figured out is how to support named options. I kind of have an idea about it, but I kind of want to leave it to a separate iteration. If I don't think it's going to change anything in the APIs.
Yeah, that was my question. Like, is that an implementation only concern, or is that a API shape concern?
I don't think it's a. Let me check again.
Like, I mean, I don't have any problem with, approving an API if we don't understand the implementation yet. That seems pretty normal. But if we think like, oh yeah, there might be additional APIs that we may add on different types or with different shapes, then I'd rather we batch them together and do one review on them, because then, the question for us would be how these things are consistent with each other.
I think it will change the shape of the already proposed APIs, and it might not even require adding a new one.
All right then. So then, seems like it's something we can approve unless somebody else objects.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So to make sure I'm understanding what's going on with this change. So with validate eagerly, it doesn't throw in line, right? Like it would still wait until like the service provider was built. So is this idea more like the iStartup filter, where basically once you're in configure, that's when you validate, like after the service provider is built? Or is it like supposed to throw out of validate eagerly?
I think it's a little bit related to the other API we approved the other day, where when we have a hosted service or like that background service, and if there is an exception that happens there, what we do, and there we would have an option to either stop, like ignore the failure, or fail fast, I guess what it was. But it's from what I can say now is it's gonna throw. I'll have to check the implementation, but I think it's gonna throw aggregate exception with all of the problems. So, but it's not going to use iStartup filter. It's going
so where is it going to throw from, I guess is my question.
I mean, it can't throw in line. Like none of the stuff is built up. There's nothing to validate yet because the things don't exist when this method actually gets called.
Exactly.
It's just it's just going to register something that's going to get called later during startup to do the validation.
Like even knowing options kind of well and knowing it's impossible, like seeing the method name, like that is kind of my problem with it. Validate eagerly. Like I assume that maybe there's like some magic where it's doing like partial validation.
I mean, maybe
like
on
inline.
startup
Yeah.
would be a better name, validate on startup, but
Yeah.
eagerly does eagerly is questionable in my mind as well.
Sure. Yeah, validate on startup. Could be.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me because I was looking at eagerly like every method call after this point is going to be auto-validating, but what does a validator mean at that point? So
I think validate on startup would be more informative too.
And then one other detailed question is, when we say annotations here, is that the same as data annotations above?
The way I propose the API addition is on another helper class. Are you asking because of the name options builder data annotation extensions?
Yeah, like the two.
If you scroll up
first
to the
two methods. The first two methods talking about the same thing, data annotations and annotations? Because it kind of feels like we should name those the same if they're talking about the same thing.
Right, yes, they are. They are. So like validate data annotations. One calls the other. Let me check. So
I feel
so
like
validate data annotations would call the eager, like the one that's called validate data annotations eagerly would call validate data annotations followed up by validate eagerly. That's not, like, it's just another convenience. It calls both at the same time.
so. Okay, let me just restate this. It seems like validate annotations eagerly should probably be named validate data annotations eagerly, right? So that they are basically the one is a suffix of the other, right?
Yes.
And then the next question, and then the next question is: it seems like the shorthand you have, like it takes the same options builder. Is that intentional? Like, because
Yes.
I thought one of them is chained after you configure the annotations, and then the other one is just what you directly call. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand the difference between the two now.
They would be changed.
Yeah, I guess my question is, what is the difference between this and that?
Validate annotation.
Like, why do we need two APIs for this? Why don't we just have validate annotations eagerly? Or validate data annotations eagerly? Why do we also have validate eagerly?
I think we don't. I don't think we. I don't have the answer right at the top of my head right now. I will have to check. Sorry. Just checking right now. So validating eagerly as opposed to data annotations eagerly. So one of them does the validation of data annotations at startup rather than you can do I don't know. I'll get back to you on this one.
So I think we said we would prefer on startup over eagerly, right? Is that fair?
Yes. I think I could be wrong, but it is possible to just use validate eagerly without using validate data annotations API if we do, when we're like using other APIs such as, let's say, I'm just looking at a sample, given services, we add the option, we configure it, and then we validate it specifically for something, and then call validate eagerly. It is possible to use other APIs rather than using validate data annotations beforehand. So that's why I had thought about having both APIs. But maybe we can put a comment in your notes and see if it's and ask David to see if it's makes sense to have both.
Like originally I thought by just reading the sample code that they're just on different types, but like then I just saw that they are on the same types, and that confused me on how they actually differ. So I guess we should also do this. So should we then push it back to API needs work? Because I mean, it seems like there's some follow-ups that we need to clarify first.
Sure. Sure. Though, just to give something from what I just looked really quick is the reason there's both of them here, both APIs, is that as you see in the usage, if I do add options and I call validate annotations and validate eagerly, I believe validate annotations would check the class, that options class, and do all of the validations based on some attributes that are on it. But instead of using that validate annotation, someone could be calling validate and configuring it specifically what properties in that option they want validated. So I mean, based on that, I think it would make sense for validate eagerly to be there on its own. And as a convenience, if someone wanted to do both of them at the same time, validate annotation eagerly is for that specifically, so that if they don't have custom validation to kind of write down inline, by just relying on the annotation, annotated, like required attributes on the class, they can just use the combined the combined API.
So I guess I'm not entirely sure I understood what you said, but it sounds like what you're saying is validate eagerly does less than validate annotations eagerly. Basically, validate annotations eagerly effectively does both validate annotations and validate eagerly. But then the question is, can we just change validate eagerly to see whether it needs to do the first thing and only does it when it hasn't been done yet? Like if there's a performance concern or something, or just ignore it entirely? Because it seems weird to have effectively two methods on the same type that differ by, basically you're proposing now validate eagerly and validate annotations eagerly, and they sound very similar, and they're both on the same type, so they will both always be visible. And it's unclear to me that people will understand which one to call when, and so it seems like they will.
So if I were to use this, what I would do is if I prepared my Coco class, my options class, and I already annotated some of the properties with some annotations to say like this field needs to be there, like required, whatever, then all I would need to do is call validate annotations eagerly, or validate data annotations on startup, the way it's renamed now. But if there are more restrictions for validation that I want to provide for some of its properties, then I would be, rather than in the usage you see in the screen, rather than those 3 lines, instead of saying, so I would still write down the first line, services.add options, my options, then I would do configure to say, let's say if it has a boolean, it has to be false, and then another one to say .validate, I want the boolean to always be true. So this one that says validate, and I want boolean to always be true, would replace the second line in the usage. and then I would call validate eagerly. But
You have to admit, I still don't quite understand the difference. I don't know, maybe somebody else on the call does it and I'm just short on coffee, because today I only have decaffeinated coffee and it doesn't help me much.
So basically the validate annotations call could be replaced with something else called the validate API that's already available.
So I mean, I think
And
today the options builder that you're extending, right, only has a single method with validate annotations, right? There's nothing else on that type today, right? So basically, in IntelliSense, people only see validate annotations and then the two new APIs that you're proposing, right?
Yes, they have validate data annotations. Yes, and these two would be extra.
Right, and so effectively, from my point of view, it seems like the only one that you would need is the shorter version, effectively, because it seems to me you're either doing validated annotations if you want to do it lazily, or you say validated annotations eagerly if you want to do it eagerly, right? And then, but it's possible that I still don't understand some nuance that you're trying to communicate to me, which I am not picking up for some reason.
I think it's sufficient to add just one API, and that's the second one, the one that says validate eagerly, which we renamed to validate on startup. And the other one was just a convenience.
I see.
It won't block anyone if it's not there. So to start, we could just have the one that you have named as validate. Was it on startup? Rather than validate eagerly. Validate eagerly, because
Okay.
that's sufficient.
All right. So then let me update this again. Scroll. Update comment. So does that match what we said?
Options builder, data annotation, extension, validate on startup. Yep. And the other one, if we were to add it later, would have been validate data annotations on startup, but we'll keep that for later if needed. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you. All right, so then where is my browser window? Here we go. All right, so we just did that, and I think this is Booyah or Jeff marked this, I think, ready for review.
Yep.
Yeah, Booyah, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So all platform attributes and some of the operating system platform check methods accept the string argument, which expressing the platform and with optional version part. So this proposing this analyzer for checking if that string argument is correct, if the platform name is known platform name, and if the version is parsable. Well, this exact example is showing the checking for the platform name is known. So we're planning to collect platform names from operating system platform check methods we added in Fiverr, and also from the MS build item group supported platforms list, and then we'll check the platforms against that. And plus to this, I think we also need to check if the version part is parsable, if it's provided. And there is some example if you scroll down more, and so the first example, there is window is not invalid platform, and we will flag that. And second version is not parsable. It should be like at least 2 numbers with separated by dot. 2 to 4 numbers separated by dot, and etc.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So basically, I think we had another conversation. We talked about how we know which platform names are valid. And I think when I wrote this issue, I proposed that we just look at the method names on operating system. But I think we had this side conversation with Marek where he was saying we should support an open-ended set, and I think you proposed that we also include platform names that the author manually put in the project file via the supported platform item group, right? So we basically take the union of both.
Yep. That will be added to the MS build list, so analyzer will just get from there.
Right. I mean, the only downside that I can see with that is that basically means we can validate the attributes, but we would not catch typos in the project file. But I think that's probably fine because you usually only have that entry once, versus the attributes you may have multiple times in your whole thing. So it seems, generally speaking, more worthwhile to validate what occurs more frequently. And it seems also worthwhile to support what Marek wanted, which is you can tell the system, yeah, there's a platform you don't know about it yet, that's fine. I still want to be able to put them on attributes and don't not get warnings. So we should probably, I don't know whether you added this as a comment here, but I think we should probably call this out somewhere in here that it's the union of both.
I think on the definition you have 1, 2. Those are the.
Oh yeah, it says the list
that
is
is
the combined
already
set.
included.
Yeah. Huh, funny. See, I don't even remember what I wrote. Okay, so that makes sense. Does anybody else have feedback on this? Or questions?
Seems reasonable to me.
Alright, if nobody else is there, then
That's it.
that's pretty much it.
Severity, so just to be info.
That's a good question. I mean, severity-wise, I would make them warnings. I mean, it seems like we have a high catch rate here, right? Because we would know what platform names are valid. We know what their version number parses or not. So I don't see why this wouldn't be warnings. Like I can't think of a false positive here.
Yeah, just because it will not broke anything if it's wrong, but I'm okay with warning.
Alright, so then I think warning and on by default seems reasonable, man. Alrighty, then I think next one. I think that's also Booyah.
Yeah, it is also kind of related, so we can add now multiple platform attributes, and also platform attributes applied to the top level member will apply to the all members within that. container, so we need to have some rule to have to evaluate those nesting and the multiple attributes applied to a member. And so this is one of the examples for the nesting. We have a rule where nested APIs cannot be expanding the parent platform support. In this case, like if this type sum is supported only for iOS, then the members inside it cannot support anything else, and we want to flag that. And if you scroll down, there is more example we want to cover with this analyzer. Like first one can be the nesting, and then next ones we want to flag for the in case then there is multiple attributes applied, then and if there is some inconsistency with for evaluating the attributes, we want to flag. For example, for the inconsistent list example, it's literally saying this API is supported on Windows only, but also unsupported on browser, for which unsupported browser is causing inconsistency because, well, it's already only supports for Windows. It doesn't need to have unsupported on browser first. And second, we have rule that all attributes within the list should be supported only or unsupported only, like allow list or deny list rule.
Right.
And it's just kind of showing that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then the multiple attributes for same platform.
Yeah, the above was for the different platforms, but this one for same platforms. Like, for example, there is 2 supported attributes which with different versions. We will right now the analyzer is just ignoring only taking the slowest version and ignoring the second one, but I think we better to run it so that this one is redundant.
Yeah. So the first example makes sense to me because basically you have 2 minimum bounds, but then the second one seems reasonable, no? Because basically it would mean the platform author did something weird, but like that doesn't seem illegal, right? Because the basically it says, okay, we introduced the API on iOS 12, then we decided to remove the API on iOS 14, and then in iOS 15 we changed our mind and added the API again.
Well, that is first doesn't, for me it doesn't really make sense. Like, by my understanding, unsupported is like kind of the API is obsolete or kind of removed, and and making it available back is first doesn't make much sense, and second it's just making more complicated the logic, so that we need to have keep track of many range certainly. So right now, like the analyzer,
I know it's unheard
is
of.
ignoring it.
I know it's unheard of that Apple or us would listen to customer feedback about having deleted things, but it could happen that something got removed and after a bunch of complaints it comes back. I guess we did that with Net Standard 2.0.
I mean, I called it out in my original spec that is something that is, the encoding or the attributes would allow it. I mean, I'm okay with saying, if the analyzer today can't handle basically ranges, I think I'm personally okay with warning on that. And then if this ever happens, we can remove that warning and can change our analyzer to handle that case, right? Because, it does seem fringe, right? And it seems it's not impossible, but it does seem relatively unlikely, right? I mean, I would say I would not bet my life on it. So, I mean, as Jeremy said, I mean, in .NET we have done exactly that thing, right? Net Standard started with removing everything, and then we changed our mind and added a bunch of stuff back because it broke too many things. So, but I mean, even in Net Standard, it's kind of like, we never really removed, we just added a new thing called Net Standard with fewer APIs, and that thing was only ever growing. Like, we didn't make breaking changes between versions of Net Standard, right? So I think Windows did the same thing, right? When they started Windows 8, they effectively didn't add all the Win32 APIs, and then over time they added more and more of these APIs back, right? But like that is similar to what Net Standard did, right? So I'm okay with it. I would just say, yeah, just brace yourself that eventually you may have to support that. And then deny list seems also reasonable.
Just same logic if it was unsupported and then cannot resupport.
Yeah, try to understand. Like, so is it so? Did you mean 20,004? Like, is the last entry supposed to be version number wise higher than the third entry?
Yeah, exactly. For this case, like supported start support from the 2004, but the unsupported one is before that. Like second unsupported one is before that. So it's the unsupported versions are only the one with the lowest version is accepted and the other one will be ignored.
It seems like basically what you're saying is the analyzer can handle the thing when a thing becomes supported and when it stops being supported, but you can't have multiple ins and outs, right?
Yes, if there is no support in between that two unsupported, then the later support will be just right now it's just ignoring, but now we want to warn for that.
Right. Yeah, I mean the second case makes perfect sense because it's duplicated. Yeah, the third one, the first one is similar to the previous one. Like in principle, that doesn't seem impossible, right? Like it should, like it's logically it's not inconsistent or anything. It just seems unlikely. So I think same thing. It's okay to say we can't express that today because of the way our analyzer is written, but if we ever need it, we would have to add it, right? But that seems reasonable. Mm-hmm. Anybody any concerns with this, or it seems to me same rule. I would make it a warning. I would have it on by default because we want people who annotate APIs to have some sanity checking.
But there's one question for the first scenario, very first one.
The very first one?
If you, yeah, for the nesting, and this is again now happening in runtime when there is GFM attributes added, like for the multi-targeted projects. So these might cause a warning.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that is the problem that we discussed, right? Where
yeah,
that I think we need to have a solution for that problem. I think that's I would almost treat this as a secondary issue, but yeah, you're right. This might cause some false positives based on how we emit them today. But I think we need to handle that no matter what. So I think the general rule to say you can't widen support makes sense. And we should validate that, and then we should just deal with the multi-targeting issue that we currently have. Jeremy, you're awfully quiet.
What's the question?
Do you have any concerns with that? Opinions on severity?
I mean, not really. Warning seems fine. I don't think we'd see too many false positives. You are in a weird state. Error seems excessive.
Yeah. I don't think we have any errors, actually. Do we have any analyzers that are errors?
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. Warn until we have evidence that we've gone too far.
By the way, for this one, fixer code suggests just to remove the inconsistent attribute, but for the previous analyzer, I forgot to mention that it doesn't make sense to have a fixer like for for correctness of the platform name or versioning.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with saying remove the inconsistent one is you don't know which one's the inconsistent one. Especially if it's in a class declared with partial classes. But they don't have to accept the fix, so that's fair.
Alright, then I think I'm done with this one as well. And can't believe it, we're out of issues. No, there's one more. Alright, Eric.
Yeah, this is just continuing the conversation we had last Tuesday. We were basically short of approving this because we weren't decided on whether we should be exposing queryable overload. And I suppose the answer is like we really should, because we do that for all methods that expose us. It's returning IEnumerable, so we should avoid having IQueryables binding to the IEnumerable overload. So, yeah.
Alright, so that makes sense. So we just add them both. And then I think the idea is that that's what we will always do, right? Every time we add to...
Yeah, so we are checking for parity for every LINQ method with a few exceptions, and the exceptions are typically methods that return things like dictionaries or types that don't necessarily do not have any correspondence in queryable. Like the rule is, if something returns IEnumerable, you should definitely create a queryable overload.
Okay, and so you said like we have a rule. Is that something that we test for, as Steven suggested, or is that just something
we do?
Okay.
We do, yeah. There are like 2 or 3 methods that we don't test, like namely toLookup, toDictionary, and these types of things.
So does the try get non-enumerated count?
That should not have an IQueryable implementation.
Okay.
So that would be added to the blacklist when we do implement it.
Alright, so then let me just add that. Okay, so boom. Alright, so then I think this was the last one we had scheduled. Alright, so then let's go over
Oh, that's gonna take a lot of conversation. If you feel that 30 minutes are enough.
Is it that bad? Okay, then maybe we should skip it. But like, I mean, eventually we should. I mean, we should shoot for things we can finish in the next 30 minutes. I don't know what's happening here with my screen. Okay, so you're saying this time takes longer than 30 minutes?
Well, I mean, if you're feeling optimistic, but it's many methods, so I'm assuming that there will be a significant conversation going on here.
Yeah. Anyway, let's just take it. Seems reasonable.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, the proposal, as the title suggests, is extending the existing distinct, except, intersect, union, min, and max methods with by counterparts. And basically what that means is these would basically complement the existing overloads of distinct, except, etc., 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 that currently accept IQueryable comparers, and these would actually accept key selectors instead. Obviously, we're also exposing overloads that do accept IQueryable compare for the key, because I suppose there's precedent in the API. And that's more or less the gist of this. Distinct by just simply implements distinct, accepting a key selector instead of an IQueryable compare. You have the max by and min by overloads that again accept a key selector for determining the comparable, the ordinal for selecting the minimal and maximal elements in the collection. And the final two methods are really just additions of overloads that should have been in LINQ but are simply missing. So I've added those for completeness. So if you scroll a bit to the right, you'll see that basically they just add overloads that accept that custom ICompare argument. We don't have that at the moment.
I see. I mean, honestly, that makes sense to me. Like, I often wanted the distinct by. I think I never ever needed accept or accept by, but for consistency, that makes sense.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but I think the last two methods are a typo. They should not be accepting a func argument. I think I did a mistake there in copying and pasting. The last two methods should really take an animable source and a custom ICompare.
Yeah, that makes sense. So my only question is, we don't make any guarantees on order, right? So if you say distinct by, it's just like, well, you get whatever thing happens to be first for our purposes here, but that might change between releases, right?
Well, I believe that the current implementation does have stability. I haven't checked, but there shouldn't be a reason why we couldn't guarantee that.
Yeah, I mean, for distinct by, maybe because you're effectively streaming, but like I'm thinking, like, I don't know, I don't quite know how we do accept or intersect or union by. So I could imagine if we construct a hash set somewhere or a dictionary or something, that due to the way hashing works, you may not get the first one, you might get the third one.
So my assumption is that whatever semantics we have for the existing distinct, accept, etc. methods, we would follow the exact same semantics in these new overloads.
Fair enough. So everybody is awfully quiet, so does it mean everybody agrees with that, or have people like fallen asleep?
Alright, so distinct by is like you have a bunch of log messages and they have a user ID property, and so you say, distinct by im to im.uid, and then that'll give you one, that'll return an enumerable of the log messages still, but only one per user.
Correct.
Okay. And so doing select and distinct loses data because you've gone in and can't get back out.
Correct. You could technically still achieve this using the existing distinct method. However, you'd have to implement a custom IQueryable compare that projects to the key you're interested in distincting by. So
fair enough. So this is mostly simplifying the case where someone's writing a custom equality compare just to compare one field.
And I think I have a question for everybody here. Imo, if you scroll a bit to the right, So you see that like we've added overloads that accept a custom iQuality compare or iCompare for the key type. My gut feeling is that this is kind of overkill because typically when you project to a key, that key is typically like some kind of ordinal that already has like well-defined either equality or comparison semantics. So I'm wondering whether we really need those. That being said, there is precedent. We've done this elsewhere, but I want to get like.
I would leave them for strings if nothing else.
Use a comparer, it's because of string sensitive case sensitivity, and in almost no cases do I care about the casing. Like very recent example, like the API review the themes of .NET website basically uses issue IDs as the key, but the issue ID itself is not unique, so prefix it with the .NET/repo pound whatever. But I don't trust that I get everybody in the same casing, so I would probably for strings almost always use the overloads to take the comparer. I mean, one thing we could consider is just making the comparer nullable. Sorry, default to null. If we care enough, because I don't know. Seems like something that should be straightforward.
I was going to suggest that, but I think that on most of enumerable was written before default parameters, so I think it's based on overloading. So
yeah, I'm fine with
it. It matches the current type style. But yeah, it makes sense for strings of do you want case insensitive, or do you want to pull in one of the culture comparers that'll treat what's umlaut emo OE?
Well, it's the O with dots on top, right? OE is the spelling.
But that'll compare as equal to an O followed by an E.
Oh, wow. Actually, I don't know. I mean, I think that probably Tarek or Levi would be better suited to translate.
Fair enough.
I would think so. I mean,
strings are weird.
I think honestly, I would probably never need the comparer, like the iComparer, because I mean, that one is not casing. I think, is it? Well, I guess they do, right? Because lowercase.
Well, for the distinct by, it's the iEquality comparer, so that would be like string comparer dot ordinal ignore case.
Yeah, I'm thinking about these guys here, like for min and max. Like I guess it also matters because lowercase c is, I guess, lower than uppercase c, I think, for example. So maybe it matters there as well.
Fair enough. I'm thinking, like, what if I want to get the longest string from a list or something? I might use this with the comparer. Wow.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, I mean, just for consistency, it totally makes sense to have.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah, because that would be like strings to string length max, unless you actually wanted one of the longest strings. So.
Yeah. All right then.
I'm excited though. It's super convenient in F#. We should definitely add it.
There is another, I guess, design consideration that was prompted by the original poster that I would like to bring up. If you scroll a bit further down, Emo, you'll see that there's a second API proposal that was the sort of original API proposal. Right, that one. So if you notice here, like, I like to draw your attention to the except by and intersect by overloads. And you'll see here actually that sort of the second and third overloads in the proposal actually support heterogeneous enumerables. So like the second thing that you're accepting can be of a different type. And the idea is that the function accepts two different key selectors, one for the first sequence and another for the second sequence, effectively making this a join-like construct.
Right.
Sorry, you were going to say?
No, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of pushed back on that design because I kind of feel that this is a very different beast compared to what our existing exec methods and intersect methods are doing. It's not like, set difference or intersection in, set theoretic terms, it is something very similar, but also very different. So, A, I'm not necessarily convinced that this is useful, and B, if we do decide to add it, it should probably carry a different name.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why you would want that, because the whole point is you want to effectively subtract one collection from the other using a property, right? In which case you're basically normalizing over the T key. And so in that case, the T source is kind of a red herring, right? Because you're just saying, well, just subtract the key. So I can see this being useful, and if you wanted, I don't know how else you would do it, because you would basically have to normalize the stuff first, but that kind of defeats the point for calling the by methods, right?
Right, because to go back to my log message thing, because I'm not capable of complex thought. If you had a filtered list of users whose messages you don't want to see, I mean, yes, you could do your messages and then a where not, but if you had an IEnumerable of your don't show me these users list, then you would want messages except by list of user IDs to ignore source goes to message.uid. Like that, I can see the scenario. I don't think it would be very common, and you can work around it easily. So unless there's a strong need for it, I think it's fine to wait. But I can see where it has value.
Yeah, I mean, equally though, I understand the concern, because I mean, these are not. I mean, link overloads usually have not pretty, completion, because they are like beefy constructs usually, and these ones certainly don't help with that. But I don't know. They remind me a lot of the the zip APIs, where they look a little bit awful, but then they do exactly what you want, and if they don't do that, they're pretty not useful, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's also worth pointing out that there is an asymmetry here. Like, you can only really achieve, this kind of generality with the accept and intersect methods.
Right.
You couldn't do it with union, and you couldn't do it with distinct, because distinct is a completely different piece, right? But you can't do it with union, and that kind of this seems to indicate to me that this is like a different operation.
Well, I mean, for union it makes sense though, right? Because union kind of still implies you have to unify on the T source, because you have to return the T source, right?
Exactly.
So, that's not the case for accept or intersect, which is why I would say, I mean, yeah, it's a different operation, as in, like, it's not union, it's accept, right? And so, I honestly think it actually makes sense as it was proposed. I don't know what others think, but I would probably prefer this API shape over the other one.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that they would make sense as the names accept and intersect, because they're both, one's an inclusive filter and the other's an exclusive filter, of where you have the complex world where you have T source 2, like, needing a key selector. I don't know that I like. Maybe it would be intersect. No, but that's the first one. Intersect by the first thing in the filter of keys.
Right.
Because in my scenario, you would, even if you had a complex structure representing your filter list, you would just run the select to get the key selector. You don't need it. You don't need to unify back to the bigger object.
Yeah, I think that's a good compromise, actually.
So what is the proposal?
So to the original API proposal, we add the first overload as proposed, where the second IEnumerable is of type T key. So supposing you have a heterogeneous collection, you can just do a select within the argument. Is that what you were saying, Jeremy?
Yeah. So you have log messages dot accept ignore IDs, comma m to m.uid.
That sounds so gross, though. I'm sorry, like, to have to do an extra select.
No, but that's the key selector.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you wanted to do this for.
Twice, right? You have to write it once for the parameter to distinct by, or we're talking about distinct by, right?
No, we're talking intersect by. Or
sorry.
accept by.
Okay, so intersect by. So the idea is that you're never getting an item out of the second IEnumerable, right? So you're trying to make that very explicit.
Right, so it's, I have a list of log messages. Don't show me any that are by these 3 UIDs.
Right.
So, or only show me messages by these 3 UIDs. So yes, that's technically messages where the UID is in the set, but that's the same as saying messages dot intersect filtered UIDs, and then now you need a key selector so you can match them of that the message, the thing I want you to filter by is the user ID.
Yeah, I think that actually.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but isn't the key selector the same that you pass to accept by, the same thing you'd be passing to select, basically?
Well, it depends on which overload you're talking about, right? I mean, in the first one, you pass in the thing that you want to intersect, and then you basically say, well, you give me the keys as an IEnumerable, so you don't need a key selector for the second one, and then you only give a key selector for the first one, right?
Right, but you're going to end up writing the key selector twice to get the second IEnumerable.
Well, but
Like,
but the other ones have the
mean,
same
it's-
problem, right? Because
except-
if they have different types, you have to have a key selector for first, and you have a key selector for second. So it does kind of make sense to me to say, like, well, why do we do this if you can just pass in the second argument as an IEnumerable already, because you don't actually care about this thing at all, you just care about the keys.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that our implementation is better than doing basically double for each, but assuming it is, then if you write it as the select, you force the double for each. Or sorry, if you write the where, you force the double for each.
Yeah, and that actually works also for cases where you don't need to do a select in the first place, where you have like just a sequence of the things you want to, of the keys basically.
Right.
I also feel that, like, you know, LINQ methods that take too many lambdas as parameters, for me that's no.
Yeah, I think that for the highlighted one, or partially highlighted one, I think that there's value in that. The next two can be written in terms of the first.
Yeah.
So I don't think they make sense as public methods.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so basically we only take the first one from each, right?
Correct. And presumably with an iQuality compare overload as well.
Yeah, that's the slightly shitty version of that, but that's fine.
So if I have 2 IEnumerable key sources, then I want to do accept by to just get like all the items in first that isn't in second. Like, I now have to do, like, for the second parameter, dot select key selector, and then for the
No, the one where they're both T source is in the earlier set we already talked about.
Okay, sorry. So that might have been my misunderstanding. So we're going to keep the one that takes 2 IEnumerable T source.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's only about when the types mismatch, basically, right? That's the way to think about it.
Correct.
That makes a lot more sense. I was confused. I thought we were going to have to write like a lot more code for the common case.
Oh, fuck. What did I just do? Alright, so sorry, this is a copy-paste exercise, and once the screen width is exhausted, it's surprisingly difficult to keep track of where you are. Alright, I think I got it. Except that now yeah, I think I may have deleted the other except methods. Ay. Alright, so let's get these guys back. Okay. Nope, leave the other one. So these are the, yeah, this is the one I want. And then of course we do the exact same thing for IQueryable, right?
Yep.
Is it just me replacing IEnumable with IQueryable? Oh no, no.
Basically, but you only do that for the first argument.
And then there's the expression tree stuff, so that's... Oh god, there's nothing to copy paste from. Okay, fine, I can do that. That's not going to be a pain at all. Alright, so... Yeah, and then the key selector is same signature except it's expression off, right?
Right. By the way, unless you've already done it, just a reminder that there's a typo in the last max and min overloads.
Yep, I already fixed those.
Cool.
Alright, so then I think, barring any typos, which of course I'm well known for to never have any typos, this is it. I probably have to scroll here so that people can actually see what's going on. It's not painful at all. So yeah, so this is the one with simple two things, and this is the overload, I think, where we have the key selector for the second one.
I think if you scroll down to the IQueryable segment, the second arguments should be IEnumerables rather than IQueryables.
Oh, sorry, that's what you meant by only the first one, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably we don't want them named first and second, since that doesn't make sense in context.
Yeah, I think they're named slightly differently.
So, source and, I don't know, filter. And then key selector instead of key selector first.
They're called source 1 and source 2 in the case of queryable.
For
That's
accept.
For all. That's the naming convention in the existing queryable overloads.
Okay, so accept calls them source 1 and source 2.
Yep.
Weird.
Alright, I can do that. Right, and then so for so does it mean for enumerable we need to change the parameter names, or is first or second the right one?
I believe it's all source 1 and source 2.
Like, I think the original proposal is also first and second everywhere.
Is it?
Yeah, except for min by, that's source. But
In the queryable stuff, or
no, in the so in queryable it's all source 1, source 2, and in enumerable you had everything first and second.
oh, okay. I guess my answer then is, I will compare with what already exists and might amend some of your things.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
Alright, so copy paste again, and now I find the browser window one more time. Okay, let me just comment this because otherwise it's a pain. And then you guys can scroll on your own time because there's no way I can fit this on the screen.
Yep.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah, I thought something was missing, but I think it's fine.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we got the gist approved, and so if there's any minor things, just change it.
Cool.
Alright, so then I think we're out of time, and we took the big one today, so pretty good.
Yay. Thanks.
Alright, thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.